Hey everybody, it's Mick here. Hope you're doing well today. We're going to continue our series on personality disorders, namely the cluster B conditions of what some refer to as the Dark Triad. Those are psychopathy, or sociopathy is what some of them call, but I delineated the difference in last fog. What we're talking about today is Machiavellianism, and then the third one is narcissism. Like I said, today we're going to delve into the world of Machiavellianism. Now, I'm going to call it, let's sit back a little bit here. I'm going to call it MACV for short, because after a while, just saying Machiavellianism over and over. So you'll hear me say MACV, and that's what I'm talking about. Now, if I had to sum up the overall concept of MACV, it is really, the best way to state it is the end results justify the means used to reach the goal. That's, the ends justify the means. That's probably the best way, the simplest way to put it. But of course, there's so much more involved than just that statement. So we're going to look at the personality characteristics of MACV, okay? Is what we're going to delve in today and kind of get in pretty deep into it. Before I begin, I always want to remind you, and I want you to remember, these short tutorials, they do not make one an expert on personality conditions, what I call PCs, okay? So please refrain from going out and diagnosing others, with a PC, even though you may recognize some of these symptoms that we're going to talk about and discuss. And also, it's very complicated. It's very complex. There's 6 criteria for we have 10 PCs listed and 3 clusters, A, B, and C, and we're in B cluster. But for one to meet a PC, first you've got to have the 6 criteria. And the first one, and these are listed in the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, 5th edition. So the first one is if a person's personality it must be markedly different from what is expected, from our cultural or societal standards. So it's got to be you can see a glaring difference in what is expected. A person who is like a severe recluse or something like that and avoids all contact with others is an example of this. We could say, hey, that is markedly different, okay? I'm looking at a bald eagle just landed in a tree, sorry. Let me get back to this. Number 2, okay? A person's personality must dramatically interfere with their relationships, and it causes distress in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. As an example, if I get fired from several jobs, let's say, or I have wives that leave me and dogs run off because I tend to be very antisocial, and I think this is a good example of which it interferes with my relationships, okay? The third one, this is important, is this personality pattern must be enduring and pervasive across a broad range of personal and social situations, meaning that PC, personality condition or personality disorder, is part of a lifetime and does not change regardless of the situation, okay? Number 4, as an adult, a PC must be traced back to either childhood or adolescence. It can't be just instantaneous or something that happened not too long ago. We must be able to trace this particular condition and personality back to childhood or adolescence. and number 5 is this cannot be explained by another medical disorder like severe depression or perhaps a neurological lesion, a brain tumor and such. And lastly, number 6, we got to be able not to attribute the psychological effects of a substance to another medical condition, as part of it. So we can't be able to say, well, it's this substance caused it, or this other medical condition has caused it. So those are the 6 criteria that must first be met before we even consider the sub-criteria. All right. Now, let's see. Cluster B is known as the dramatic erratic conditions. The first, the antisocial, which I've clumped together in a series of psychopathy, sociopathy, Machiavellianism. And the next is narcissistic. And then we have borderline personality disorder or personality condition. And lastly, histrionic. So those are the 4 that are in cluster B: antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. Okay, but I've taken narcissistic, psychopathy, sociopathy, and Machiavellianism and combined them into what is known as the Dark Triad. And some researchers and authors, they've also done this: psychopathy, sociopathy, Machiavellianism, and toxic narcissism into what we call the Dark Triad. So you can go type it into a search engine, and it should come up as that. Now, Machiavellianism is not listed in the DSM-5, and no longer is psychopathy or sociopathy. They clumped them all together in what is called antisocial disorder. And in the last video, we discussed psychopathy, and today, like I said, we're going to get into the heart. Of Machiavellianism. Basically, the ends justifies the means to reach one's goals. And I'm sure we can all, if you think about what I just said, reaching one's goals, it doesn't matter, the ends justify the means. We can all give current examples, especially with our political climate and some MACVs, going on. But what's really interesting is the history of this. This has been around for a while, so I'm gonna talk about the history of it. And this word, it comes from Machiavellianism. It comes about from a 13th century Italian diplomat and a writer. He was a writer. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli. He wrote a book called The Prince, and where he outlined deception, treachery, and crime as a necessary toolkit for politicians or business practices, right? It was basically, the book in that day was an anarchist cookbook, or maybe what we call Sun Tzu's Art of War, but it was used for climbing the ladder of success by whatever means. The term was used over the centuries. And then in the 1960s, 2 psychologists, Christie and Geis, 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 I think that's how you pronounce it, decided to scientifically study those they thought exhibited these characteristics. So today we have a flavor of MACV in antisocial disorder. Even though it's not listed, you're going to see some of these symptoms if you look into DSM-5 that some I'm describing will fit MACV, but it's not listed there, okay? Like I said in the last vlog, the Dark Triad has these overlapping traits, meaning we're going to find these traits, I'm describing in all 3: psychopathy, narcissism, toxic narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Yet we're going to see some defining characteristics for these 3. But today we're really going to delve into this PC much more than traditionally described. So you can see the difference, as well as the similarities. Okay, I want to get ahead of myself. Now, there was a philosopher, I remember this, and I don't remember who it was, but he said the deepest source of a man's philosophy, the one that shapes and nourishes it, is faith or a lack of faith in mankind. Now, when you think about that, I think that describes the inner being best of what Machiavellianism, what it is. It's a lack of faith in others, or what we refer to as cynicisms. We see, they see others as inept or incompetent. Others are gullible and whimsical, and MacV will unhesitatingly consider the use of other people as targets of exploitation for personal gain. Okay, all right. So basically, they view others as fundamentally flawed, a lesser being than they are, and they will describe or label others as such. A good example of this is when elitists, I'm going to call them elitists, just for a term, they feel like they know what is better for citizens rather than the common folk, us ordinary masses, right? We have heard some political figures call them Joe Sixpack, deplorables, cattle, sheep, and, make statements that sheep are made to shear, which is, I think, definitely condescending and denigrating remarks for sure. But, sometimes it's really hard to see the inside or the deep feelings of people, of others. We can't see what's inside of them. So what we have to do is make ourselves knowledgeable of these outward machinations of MacV, okay? Now, we have two types of MacVs, and this is what I call them. First is what I call the proto-successful. Those are those we tend to think is having already obtained levels of power and influence. And what I call, the second one is what I call trajectory MacVs, those that are on the rise. We'll see them at work, in the office, or other social environments, including churches and in academic settings, okay? They're somewhere where there's this competitive atmosphere, okay? This last group, this trajectory Machiavellians, is what I think we really need to be wary of and alert for, because that's what we're going to kind of run into. Now, of the three, the Dark Triad, of the three in the Dark Triad, MacV, I think, is the most camouflaged. It's hidden within layers of deceit, selfishness, and greed. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I just had lunch. I apologize. When I say greed, now, it's not money, also money, but it's also power and control. Influence. They want influence, okay? And I've heard it said that when you have power, it's when you have something that another wants, or something, information, that others need. And they will use this position of influence to manipulate. Now, an example is what I'm going to call soft or long-term manipulation, okay? Because they're going to manipulate. And these characteristics of manipulation, they'll come into fruition when the opportunity is right, okay? They're opportunists. So a MacV may string and use someone for others for months or even years, unbeknownst to the affected. Or it can be a short-term manipulation. But just remember that manipulation is contingency based. When the timing is right and the opportunity is apropos, then the art of use will come into play. All right. Now for the MACV to actively and successfully manipulate other people, they need an intact and well-developed theory of mind. I'll explain theory of mind here in just a second. He or she must be able to read the mental state of others and use this information to predict the other's reaction and behavior. So that theory of mind, it's where I can introspect with you. I have that ability to kind of understand what you're going through in that. So it's not empathy per se, but it's a cognitive ability to accurately read another's thoughts and mirror those back, okay? Of course, if you remember, this is different from psychopathy. They have no conscience and cannot, from experience, understand the emotional inner workings of another. So the MACV, they will permeate this level of empathetic deception, is a good way to put it, which some have, I think, described it. I've read they've described this as an evil twin of real empathy, okay? Because it's spurious. You know, it looks almost real, but it's the evil twin. Now, it's not that they don't have empathy, but the empathy is elicited and guarded, and it's used judiciously to achieve certain goals. This empathetic deceit, it's also called cold empathy or manipulative empathy. It's used cautiously and basically is disingenuous in strategic form. Meaning it's used purposely and it's planned. It's instrumental, I guess, is a good way to put it. Also, unlike the psychopathic person, MACV, they are risk aversive. You know, they fear punishment or being discovered or ridiculed. See, they're not impulsive, which is a psychopathic trait. They will, and they'll always try to have a solid alibi of denial. Just as much planning goes into use of getting away with a ploy as executing the ploy, I guess is a good way to put it. So the goal is twofold: to pull off the act, right, and to get away scot-free, looking totally innocent, and maybe even victimize themselves. So they are very much committed to long-term plans, and are very flexible when contingencies arise. Okay. So to summarize, I'm going to summarize real quick. To summarize so far, MACV uses these antisocial methods to facilitate goal attainment. All right, which is normally associated with selfish greed. Money, power, these environs, and influence. And they rationalize the means of such by intellectualizing the end state. Remember? The end justifies the means. They are strategically manipulative. And, they have stages of preparation, of planning, forethought, expediency, logic, and like I said earlier, opportunism. I think when it comes to opportunity, just remember the saying, and we've all probably heard this: never allow a good crisis to go unused in order to gain advantage. Okay? And this advantage could be a tangible advantage, or it could be an intangible advantage Like an intangible advantage would be something like one's improving their reputation, okay? And last, I think successful deniability is a good summary point, okay? Getting away with it is just as important as the achievement. So that's my dog down there barking at the cat. All right. Now, real quickly, I want to contrast male and female MACVs, the difference between a male and a female Machiavellian. Typically, males will use a heavier handed approach, like fear, anger, or dominate leveraging to achieve a single score. You know, their language can be a lot rougher and a lot more in your face, I guess. But, you know, those are more discernible. But then again, for males, society sort of allows, if not encourages this behavior. So, you know, we may not notice it, may not be so forthright, since, you know, in our society it could be expected. Now, females are more likely to use subtle manipulation strategies, which are evasive and interpersonally sophisticated approaches. So what I mean by that is they're going to get really close, very sophisticated interpersonal connections to the thoughts and feelings of the particular audience that they're trying to manipulate. Where the male may have a point of entry in this cognitive realm, you know, that they'll try to enter through the logic or rationale. I think females will approach more from the emotional side, sort of like pulling on your heartstrings, if you will. Ladies tend to be more long-term oriented, and they will fluctuate the manipulative state. They'll go up and down, they'll fluctuate it, going in and out of it for sake of genuine appearance. So they can really put on that act really well, and they'll adjust it as necessary. And this by promoting the goodwill of their victims to reach the long-term goals. You know, just in my mind here, just think of this term, and nothing else comes to mind right now, but it's, you know, think of what's known as gold diggers, I guess, to get a picture, you know, if that's fair. So back to the summary. Machiavellianism as a personality trait, it's a constellation of number one, I think, cynical attitudes toward human nature. They have this dark view of humanity. Number two, they perceive others as weak and untrustworthy. They may even try to test their inner circle for trustworthiness. You know, they may set up some failure to see what happens in that respect. Number three, I think inside of them there's this self-serving motivation that legitimizes putting one's own needs ahead of others. Okay, and you'll see that you got to be aware of that. So I think the fourth thing is, number four. I'm on four. The use of manipulation and deceit to achieve their goals is basically the opening paragraph in their playbook. Okay, you know, and lastly, number five, they lack a concern with conventional moral standards. Now, this is not to say that they don't possess morals or have empathy, okay? They are judiciously used, their morals and empathy. Doing harm is not the motive, okay? I don't want to misconstrue myself. But, so doing harm is not part of the motive, but it could be a part of the methodology to achieve the end state. And any hurt that is inflicted is more often than not the unfortunate byproduct of having used that person to achieve some goal. So causing suffering and harm is not, item number one. And they will, they'll only do it if it is necessary. I mean, if they have to do it and if they can get away with it. Because remember, they are punishment adverse. You may say it's all this, you could call it like this moral neutrality or a moral disengagement when it's necessary. Okay. All right. I want to get into something here. And it's basically moral disengagement, okay? I want to talk about it real quick, and we'll kind of wind her down. But, moral disengagement, I think it's a really interesting topic. Okay, how do we disengage ourselves morally from things? Basically, what does it take for a human being to morally separate themselves from other human beings or from their actions, that they do? I think the biggest tool of moral disengagement is justification or rationalizing their behavior. Remember, that goes back to the end justifies the means, through rationalization and intellectualization. So this immoral act, it may be more, so when they do this immoral act that they do, it may be more of this palatable or more acceptable by attributing it to perhaps a higher power. It kind of comes to mind. I did that for a greater good. Another way we morally disengage ourselves from our actions, I think it's kind of juvenile, but we still do it as adults. And that is what is called advantageous comparison. Think about those two words, advantageous comparison. Saying something like, well, at least I don't act like them, or at least I didn't do something worse. Didn't we do that as like adults or older children? That sort of advantageous comparison. Well, look at me or look at them. At least I'm not as bad as them. So I'm sure we can all remember times when we've heard those statements or used them ourselves. Another way is, and we use this in therapy, and it's called narrative therapy, but we don't do it in this nefarious way. We use it a little bit different. But this other way to morally disengage is it's called creative reframing. And we do use this in therapy, in narrative therapy, narrative theory. But for them, they changed the narrative by looking at the action from different aspects to where they couldn't control. And what they may do is they may say something, well, it really didn't happen that way you're describing. It was more like this. And not even be close. But this is this sort of this denial phase. But they're with it, though. They're there. And some of them may say, okay, but they're just using that to look socially acceptable, okay? So another way that I want to talk about in moral disengagement is called displacing responsibility. Displacement. This is a what we call a defensive mechanism. Displacement. One of Anna Freud's long list of how we go about defending ourselves, our ego. But displacing responsibility, it's like blaming others for the situation, or blaming the situation itself. Having this what we call an external attribute. We don't blame ourselves. So a Machiavellianism, they want to blame others, or they want to blame the situation. Like if you wouldn't have yelled at me, or then I wouldn't have reacted in such a manner. Sort of like this what we call diffusion of responsibility. Okay, it's where they can make light of the problem. We're going to kind of diminish or minimize the situation, I guess is the best way to put it. It's like It's not as bad as you make it out to be. You know, something like, well, they were going to die anyway. I just saved them from suffering. You know, things like that. So that is a way. But I think the last one, and it's the most nefarious and the most dangerous, and this is, you know, moral disengagement. How do I disengage myself morally from my immoral actions? And this last one is, it's called dehumanizing. Okay. What this is it makes someone less than human, or making them an undesirable human. You know, this has a lot to do with what we call in-groups and out-groups. An in-group is one I belong in and identify with, okay? And out-groups are those that are outside of our culture, just our way of life, or things of that nature, okay? They are different, so we're going to accentuate the difference as being pernicious, almost infectious, if you will. So this is used in war a lot, where the combatant cannot see the other as a father, a son, or a human being like we are in the in-group. You know, they're less human. They're undesirables. They're a scourge to the earth, and they need elimination. You know, permanent dispatch, so to speak. So these are the ways a Machiavellian will gain moral disengagement in order to do the things that they do in that respect. Okay, so what causes this? You know, you might be asking, and a lot of people say, okay, well, why are they this way? You know, what causes this? I would say it's both biological constraints, you know, like DNA and you know, the genetic makeup, the DNA, and also brain structure. And also there are environmental influencers that go into play here. I don't want to explain that, you know, the biopsychosocial sort of model, but I talked about this earlier in the vlog about psychopathy, you know, and the etiology of it. And there's some things that go along with that will inform you. But the difference, so one thing I want to point out about the neurological structures, which differ from the psychopath, and that is instead of having reduced cortical gray matter in some areas, because I talked about that some psychopathic people will see these diminished gray areas, and I listed 4 areas in the brain. But with MACVs, they have this actual increase in gray matter. You know, it's mainly in the striatum, which is known as a reward pathway. The insula, which enables them to inhibit emotional suppression. So it doesn't allow their emotions to come through. And that's part of the insula's job. It gives us disgust in some things. What we call the orbital frontal gyrus, it's right here behind your eyes, okay? Right in here. The orbital frontal gyrus, and under here is called the ventral medial. I'm about to show you all here real quick. Right here is what we call the orbital frontal gyrus, right behind the eyes. And this point right here, this is called the ventral medial, right through here, ventral medial prefrontal cortex. Okay, and this is our social, in this part of our brain, this is our social part of our brain, to where we're able to read socially and respond adaptively in that, okay? So this part of the social area of the brain, you know, like I said, it reads these cues and prompts. And MACVs are very adept at reading others and predicting the behavior, okay? And then I want to talk about the hippocampi, okay? The literature of the hippocampus, this is also different. It encodes, in this part of our brain, it's going to encode and stores memories, which allows Machiavellianism MACVs, they'll remember better, and that does play a part in manipulation, along with the orbital frontal gyrus, okay, and that. So these parts of the brain, they have more gray matter. So that's basically it for Machiavellianism, okay? I hope you enjoyed it. Now, the next vlog is going to cover the last tripartite of the Dark Triad, and that is narcissism. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can private message me, or you can call 256-599-0291, or you can email me at agapecounselor@outlook.com. So God bless you, and I hope this video shed some light on Machiavellianism. Bye-bye.